when you look at this picture right here, this encapsulates a lot of what we want to study here, and is an example of why ShotLink data is so good and why it's an appropriate use in this case for us. So Bubba Watson was on the 18th hole, and he had a putt of about 5 feet 4 inches, which if you can see on the scoreboard back there, anyone in the crowd or maybe even the competitors know. And so that putt for him, if he made it, he would go into a playoff with Craig Stadler sitting right back there. And he actually ended up missing this putt. And we think of this as the classic example of somebody choking in a high-pressure situation. And the objective of our research was to try and quantify this choking that we're seeing, right, that we think is out there. And so what we're going to do is look at putting on the very last hole of the golf tournament in our research design. The idea is that the make or miss of a putt is going to impact your finish position and the amount of money that you get. Right? The idea as well is that the monetary reward varies very greatly for all the players on the last hole of the tournament, and this creates varying degrees of pressure, right, for people putting on that hole. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we calculate this value of the putt. It's very important to us in our research. And then what we ultimately want to do is estimate the impact of this putt's value on the competitor's probability to make the putt. So let's just walk through a detailed example of how we would actually calculate this putt value. So looking at our example of the Waste Management Phoenix Open, right? This is our prize structure for first, second, and third place in the tournament. And we want to talk about what the dollar value amount is going to be for Bubba Watson on his 5-foot putt. So we estimate here in a little bit of a simplistic way, if Bubba Watson makes his putt, he has a 50-50 chance at winning the playoff against Baby Walrus. And his expected winnings here would be roughly $900,000. But if he misses the putt, he would end up in a tie for second place, where he would split second and third place money, and his earnings would be just over $500,000. So for us, we calculate this as a putt value of around $350,000. So, Bubba Watson, that week, I'll talk about strokes gained, what that means in a second, but he had a very good strokes gained number for the week. And he was 13th in the field, and so maybe this is showing that there was some choking going on, right? He performed well at putting early on, and he ended up missing this 5-foot putt. So I need to talk about the literature a little bit in this area, as there have been a lot of studies on sports and choking under pressure. So most of these sports studies use a binary pressure measure, measure of pressure. So there have been a few nice studies looking at penalty kicks in soccer or shootouts in soccer and hockey. And the idea here is that if your opponent makes or misses the penalty shot before you, this is going to lead you into being in a pressure or a non-pressure situation. This is nice, but ultimately the outcome of you making that goal on a penalty shot or not making it is tied to a team outcome, right? The performance of this individual is not directly tied to their reward, and additionally, we think that the goalkeeper in those studies is a factor, right? Playing a factor in if you successfully make the penalty shot or not. Whereas in golf, right, you're not directly facing any opponent when you're taking a putt, right? So we like golf in this way. Additionally, there's been studies on free throws in the NBA, right? Looking at the end of games and scoring differentials as defining a pressure or non-pressure situation. Again, we see this as a binary measure and think that we can add some there. We also, previously there's been research that's linked clutch performance to future earnings of basketball players, right? This is nice, but we're trying to do it the other way around. There's also been literature studying golf from psychologists, and here we see that they've really looked at things at a very larger scale than us, right? Where there's a lot of noise. If you look at scoring or putting in an entire round, right? Third versus fourth round, or if you just look at scoring or putting of people in the fourth round within a certain shots of the lead or further back. So the study we do here is probably most directly related to an experimental study by Early, where he actually tries to see if we offer high rewards, does it lead to underperformance? And he was able to go to India where he can offer $300, which is a relatively high reward, right? And he found that there were detriments to these high rewards, that he did find choking. And he had basic mental or physical tasks, which the people in the experiment completed. Okay, so next here we have our table of descriptive statistics. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the other control variables we used. So I've already talked to you about the value of the putt, right? And then we have distance to the pin and whether the putt is uphill or downhill, as these are important characteristics to the difficulty of the putt. Then we also have player characteristics such as age, career money earnings, and earnings in the previous year. We think this is a proxy for experience for us. And our data set, right, even though we limit to the 18th hole, right, we have 8 years of data covering 210 tournaments. That's roughly still 24,000 observations. So we have quite a big data set. Here I just want to show you some descriptive statistics of make percentage and putt value, that as the value of the putt goes up, the percentage chance that we have for the putt being made goes down, even before we've even controlled for any other of the putt characteristics and the player characteristics. All right, so I'll hand it over to Dan, and he's going to talk to you about the model and the results of our paper.
Okay. All right, so when we're looking at this, we see pretty big drop-off as the value goes up, and it happens pretty quickly. But obviously there's a lot of other factors here, like the distance and things that we haven't controlled for in just the simple table. So we go to a regression model. And so at this point, we use a linear probability model. We check it with the logistic model and things. But basically what we want to know is just did they make the shot or not. So, right, so our dependent variable is the shot made. Our key variable is that value, right? So how much monetary pressure was riding on the shot. So that's the one we're kind of focused on, but obviously there's a lot of other factors there. So we have all these characteristics Neil was just talking about, distance. So for distance, we actually use a 7th order distance polynomial, right? So there's a lot of factor in terms of whether or not the shot is made. A lot of it comes from the distance, obviously. And then we have this uphill dummy. We have some of the player characteristics. The nice thing about the shot link data and the size of our data set is we can control for things like player fixed effects. So we can look at when the same player takes a bunch of different shots of different values. How does that player handle those situations? And we can control for a lot of sort of the unobservables of both the course, what's going on sort of on the tour that year, and for that player specifically. So just to kind of give you an idea, so this is the first set of results we have, and the key thing we're focused on is that top number there. And to just kind of give you some context to it, basically that says if this putt for a player, if we add $50,000 in value, the probability they make the putt goes down 1 percentage point. Okay, so it's negative and significant. We get things like the uphill matters pretty strongly. Distance is not in here because we have this 7th order. There's 7 coefficients on it, but it's obviously highly significant, so distance matters a lot. We have the player fixed effects in here. Okay. But again, so the key thing is this pressure. We get a negative significant number, but it does take a pretty substantial amount of money to make a meaningful impact at this point. So basically what we do next then is try and break it down a little bit, and we say, well, okay, but that's for all these shots, right? So this is shots from, inches from the hole to 50 feet out and beyond. So we start to look at different ranges here. Okay? And so what we do is basically just make some rough categories. Under 5 feet, 5 to 10 feet, 10 to 15, and then everything over 15 feet. Okay? And just so to give you, again, just some context to it. For the putts from under 5 feet, we do see a significant negative effect, and that's about that $50,000. So $50,000 to drop the probability you make the putt by about 1 percentage point. But if you go to the 5 to 10 foot range, where there's the most uncertainty as to whether or not the shot will be made in general, we basically get more than double that. Okay, so we add those two coefficients, we're interacting with terms there. So you add those first two numbers together, and then it says it takes about $20,000 to drop the probability you make the shot by 1 percentage point. Okay? And then as we increase the distance and it becomes less likely that you make the putt, we see the value impact of pressure basically declining. And by the time you're at these longer putts that have a low probability of being made, there's not really that much impact. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about this at the end, but basically the idea you're getting here is when you have a lot of sort of uncertainty as to whether or not you're going to make the putt, that's when there's this chance for pressure to impact your performance. That's our theory about this. And I don't know how you feel about double axis graphs, but this is trying to show you this same idea here. So this is a little bit finer distance categorization within the first 15 feet. So the blue line is showing you how the probability the shot is made drops off. The red line is showing you our estimated impact of pressure for these kind of smaller ranges. Okay? And so on the right axis there, you're getting how big is the drop for a $25,000 putt. Okay? And so you see in that 8, 9, 10 foot range, we get almost a 2 percentage point drop, or over a 2 percentage point drop in some cases, from adding $25,000 in pressure to the player's shot. Okay? And so again, what the relationship is here is, depending on how likely it is or how confident maybe you are that you're going to make that shot, when it's most uncertain, that's when we see the biggest impact of pressure, in that kind of intermediate range of distance there, when it's, could go either way, basically. Okay. And so then the next thing we do is to try and look at what types of players, so what characteristics of the players themselves maybe lead to more of an impact of pressure. Okay, and so what we do to look at this, we did it with a bunch of different variables. This one is using career earnings. Okay, so breaking the players in our sample down based on how much they've earned in their career up to the start of the tournament. And so we do it by quartiles. Okay, and so what you see, the first number you get there, the value of the putt, is our impact for players that are in the bottom quartile of earnings. So the lowest 25%. And again, that's double of what we get for the overall sample. Okay, so just to give you that sense, where we see the biggest impact is on the players that have the lowest career earnings, least experience and least success in the past. Okay? And then as we go up, by the time you get to the top 50%, you see, well, there's quite a change there, right? The positive number sort of offsets the first coefficient. And basically, if we estimate that separately and we say take the top 50% of earners in our sample and see if there's an impact of pressure, we don't get a significant effect anymore. Okay? So what types of players? Obviously those with less experience. And again, we did this for things like how many cuts had they made in their career, how many top 10 finishes had they had in their career. So a lot of different ways you could sort of classify experience. Here we use earnings, again, sort of because we're tying it to monetary pressure, but just it's a good way to say how much success and experience has this player had before. Okay. So this is just to kind of give you that sense. Once we take those coefficients again, how much impact do we expect from a $25,000 putt? Okay, how much negative impact? And so for the bottom quartile, we're seeing, well, more than 1 percentage point drop in the probability that the shot is made. And then as we get over here, much less impact for those that have more experience, have had more success. Okay. All right, and then the next thing we do is to look at the strokes gained putting statistics. So the idea, again, is how well have you been doing in the tournament up to that point? Okay, so strokes gained putting, positive number, you're doing well, you're doing better than it's sort of expected in your putting. Negative number, obviously the opposite. And so the idea is once we've already controlled for that though, once we've put that in as a variable to say, it's just if you've been putting better, it's more likely you make the shot. But then we ask the question, if you've been putting better in that specific tournament, are you less impacted by pressure? Are you less likely to choke? So sort of the story you could think of is maybe you've been successful in your recent attempts. Okay, you've been relatively successful in the tournament in putting. And so what we're seeing is then you have more confidence then. Okay, there's less of an impact of this pressure variable because you've been putting well in the tournament. Okay, so generally that's what we find. And again, just to give you kind of the picture of what happens there, this is for the different percentiles in that tournament. How have you been doing? Okay, and so for those that have been putting poorly in the tournament, when they have a high pressure shot, we see a pretty dramatic negative impact in terms of their performance. If they've been putting well in the tournament, much less impact on average. Okay, once we've controlled for that, not as much chance for the pressure to affect them negatively. Okay. And then just, if you want to, we can talk about this kind of stuff more if you're interested later on, but we do a lot of things. So one of the things that we're kind of concerned about in terms of finding this effect is when we look at our sample of values. Okay, so there are some putts. The highest one, I don't know if you mentioned it, but it's almost $700,000 in value estimated for one shot. And so the idea was, well, maybe that's just what's driving the results. So we have these very high, a couple of really high outlying values, and that's why you get this negative impact. Okay, so maybe there's a few shots. So we do things like take out those extreme values. Okay, and similarly, we have a lot of shots that are in kind of the 0 range where there's nobody around you either way, right? Your finished position, you're 2 strokes ahead or behind somebody else. We say there's no pressure on that shot then. Okay, so maybe the fact that we have a lot of those was driving the results. It doesn't seem to be the case. We get sort of similar results there as well. Okay, and then we use a logit model if you're worried about sort of the methodology there. Okay. All right, so just to kind of wrap up, the reason that we like sort of, there's a lot of studies of choking and sports. Okay, the reason that we think this is sort of a contribution here is we have access to a good data set. There's no opponents in golf. Okay, there are opponents, but they're not directly impacting your shot. Okay, and specifically, we can quantify this level of pressure. So rather than saying, hey, I'm in a basketball game, it's within a 3-point differential, I'm taking a free throw in the last minute, that's a high pressure situation, but basically we say, is it that or is it not? Here we have this whole scale of monetary pressure, right? From putts that don't impact your final earnings at all the way up to ones where it makes $500,000 and more of difference. Okay? And so we have this real opportunity to quantify how much pressure a player is facing. Okay? We do find this negative effect here. Evidence of choking, I'll kind of skip this. If you're interested in this, we can talk about it more. We have a lot more. We have a paper if you want to read it. Probably not, but we have it. You can pick one up. And we talk about different psychology theories and that kind of thing, if you're interested in that. And then we find these different results for different types of players, different task difficulties. Okay. So I think that's it. If we have some questions, we can do that.
Is this on? Did you do any studies in terms of what putt the guy's on? For instance, if Bubba misses the 5-footer and he's 3 feet away versus if he just chipped on and he's 3 feet away, is that accounted for at all?
So I did actually, we have a number for which shot is it in the hole for them, 3rd, 4th, 5th shot, et cetera. I did put that in at some point. I guess I didn't put in, so you're saying sort of what shot they took previously almost, had they been putting? Yeah, we didn't put a specific one in there. We did have this shot, so that I think that would control for basically the same thing, which is if we're on the same hole and we had 3rd, 4th, we would observe both those, and then we put in that variable for is it the 3rd or the 4th. So I think that would probably do about the same thing. We could do that though. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yep.
I have a question for you guys about your model.
Okay.
If a guy misses the putt, are you assuming that he finishes in the lower place, or does he have to make another putt?
So that's a good question. Yeah, so we have that in a footnote, I think, in the paper. But the idea is we do assume he makes the next one in terms of calculating his probabilities, his monetary values. Okay. Now, in our sample, the ones that, once we get it restricted down to the putts we're looking at, 94, I think, % of the shots are finished within 2 putts. So, yeah.
But what if players are going to have, let's say, loss aversion, right? So
okay.
you don't want to give up 2 strokes,
yeah.
So you lag putt the first time to get it close.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't you then going to be missing something because you're not actually modeling his incentive?
So all I would say to that is that the times when you would generally lag the most is if you're going to win, right? And you have possibly a $0 value putt or there's not a finisher near you, right? So in that aspect, we're saying that, let's say you're in 2nd place, right? Before you're going to tie with the guy below you, right? You can take 2 putts, right? And so that you would, we account for that. That putt is worth $0 in our method, right? So that, a little bit of this loss aversion story is mitigated a bit by the dollar values we put on them.
Yeah, but aren't there also times where you could go from, let's say it's a bunch leaderboard, so you're putting And if you two-putt, you can go from a tie for second with a high purse to a tie for 15th. I mean, that's going to be still a big drop, right?
Yes, it would be a big drop, yes. The number of players you're tied with would impact, right, the amount of money there. And we do account for those ties. And yes, you could have big drops in that range. Yep.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.